The stagecoach rattled into Hallbrook, Arizona territory, in the summer of 1882, carrying a woman who had stopped believing in second chances until the moment she locked eyes with a man who understood what it meant to be shattered. Beatrice Sullivan stepped down from the coach, her dark blue traveling dress dusty from 3 days of hard riding across the desert. She clutched a small leather bag that contained everything she owned in this world, which wasn't much. At 23 years old, she had already buried a husband, lost a child in childbirth, and watched her family turn their backs on her when grief had driven her to the bottle for 6 terrible months. She had been sober for 4 months now, but the shame still clung to her like smoke in cotton. The town was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of wooden buildings baking under the relentless Arizona sun. Dust devils spun down the main street, and she could hear the sound of a piano playing badly from one of the saloons. She had come here because her late husband's brother had written to say there was work at his general store, though his letter had been cool and formal, making it clear this was charity, not kindness. Beatrice adjusted her bonnet and started walking toward the address she had memorized when a commotion erupted from the stable across the street. A massive sorrel horse burst through the open doors, eyes wild with panic, trailing a broken lead rope. People scattered, shouting warnings as the animal reared and plunged, hooves flashing dangerously close to a woman with a small child. Before Beatrice could think, a man emerged from the shadows of the stable with a rope in his hands. He moved with a peculiar grace, not running directly at the horse but angling to intercept it. He was tall and lean, wearing worn denim trousers and a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Even from a distance, she could see the scars on his forearms, white lines that stood out against sun-browned skin. The man began speaking in a low, steady voice that somehow carried across the chaos. The horse's ears swiveled toward him, and though it didn't calm immediately, its movements became less frantic. The cowboy moved closer, still talking, his body language completely relaxed despite the danger. When he was close enough, he reached out slowly and caught the trailing rope, then simply stood there, letting the horse come to terms with his presence. It took maybe 5 minutes, though it felt longer. The horse finally dropped its head and blew out a long breath. The cowboy stroked its neck, still murmuring words Beatrice couldn't quite hear. Someone in the gathering crowd said, "That's Lucas Pierce. Lost his whole family to Apaches 5 years back. Hasn't been right since, but damn if he isn't the best horseman in the territory." Beatrice watched as Lucas led the now docile horse back toward the stable. She caught a glimpse of his face as he turned, saw the deep lines around his eyes and mouth that spoke of pain that went beyond the physical scars. He looked to be in his late 20s, but his eyes were older, haunted by things she recognized because she saw them in her own mirror. She forced herself to look away and continued down the street to Sullivan's general store. Her brother-in-law, Thomas Sullivan, was behind the counter when she entered. He was a portly man of 40 with thinning hair and a permanent expression of disapproval. He looked up from his ledger and his mouth tightened. "Beatrice," he said without warmth, "you made it." "Thank you for the opportunity, Thomas." She kept her voice steady and polite. She had practiced this conversation in her head 100 times during the journey. "Yes, well," he cleared his throat. "My wife insisted. For Robert's memory, you understand, there's a room above the store. Nothing fancy. You'll work 6 days a week, opening to closing. Sundays you have free. Wages are $2 a week plus the room." It was barely enough to survive on, and they both knew it, but Beatrice had no leverage, no other options. She nodded. "That's acceptable. I'll expect you to be punctual and presentable, and sober." He said the last word quietly but firmly, and Beatrice felt heat rise in her cheeks. I haven't touched a drop in 4 months, she said. See that you don't. Robert was my younger brother and I loved him. But what you did after he died, the way you disgraced his memory, that's not something easily forgiven. Beatrice wanted to ask him if he knew what it felt like to lose everything in the space of a week, to hold your stillborn daughter and know your husband had died of pneumonia while you were in labor, never getting to meet the child you had both wanted so desperately. She wanted to ask if he had any idea what kind of darkness could swallow a person whole when faced with that kind of loss. But she didn't. She just nodded and followed him upstairs to the small, hot room that would be her new home. That night, lying on the narrow bed and listening to the sounds of the town settling in for sleep, Beatrice wondered if she had made a mistake coming here. Thomas clearly resented her presence, and she would be working for someone who viewed her as a burden and a disgrace. But what choice did she have? She had burned every bridge back in Kansas. At least here, no one knew her story. She could start fresh, even if it meant swallowing her pride and accepting Thomas's grudging charity. She woke before dawn and dressed carefully, pinning her honey-colored hair into a neat bun and smoothing her second-best dress. Downstairs, she found Thomas already at work on the books. He looked up, seemed surprised she was early, and grunted in acknowledgement. The work was straightforward but demanding. She swept floors, dusted shelves, helped customers, kept inventory, and learned where everything was stored. Thomas watched her like a hawk for the first few hours, but gradually he relaxed and left her to manage the front while he worked in the back office. Around mid-morning, the door opened and Lucas Pierce walked in. Up close, he was even more striking than she had realized. He had dark hair that needed cutting, gray eyes that seemed to see too much, and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. The scars on his forearms continued up past where his sleeves were rolled, and there was a jagged one along his left temple that disappeared into his hairline. He moved with the careful control of someone who had learned to live with pain. "Morning," he said to her, his voice the same low, steady tone he had used with the frightened horse. "Need to pick up an order. Should be under Pierce." Beatrice checked the shelf behind the counter where Thomas kept packages waiting for pickup. She found one labeled with his name and lifted it down. It was heavy, and she saw his eyes flicker to her hands, noting the slight tremor she couldn't quite hide. The craving for whiskey was mostly gone now, but her body still betrayed her sometimes with shakes that came and went. "That'll be $8.50, she said, reading the price Thomas had written on the package. Lucas counted out the money and slid it across the counter. Their fingers brushed for just a second as she took the coins, and she felt a jolt of something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. Recognition, maybe. The sense of meeting someone who understood. "You're new in town," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "Yes, I arrived yesterday." "I'm Beatrice Sullivan, Thomas's sister-in-law." Something shifted in his expression, though she couldn't read what it meant. "Lucas Pierce. I run a small horse ranch about 3 miles out. If you need anything, if Thomas." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "If you need anything, the ranch isn't hard to find. Just follow the north road past the last house." Before she could respond, Thomas emerged from the back room. His expression darkened when he saw Lucas. "Pierce, got your supplies, I see." "Yep." Lucas picked up the package easily, though it had to weigh at least 30 pounds. "Much obliged." He nodded to Beatrice and left without another word. Thomas watched him go, then turned to Beatrice. "Stay away from that one. He's trouble. He seemed perfectly polite to me. He's got a darkness in him, drinks too much, gets into fights. After what happened to his family, he just gave up on being civilized." Thomas shook his head. "The Apache raiding party that killed his wife and daughter, it destroyed him. He tracked them for weeks, and when he came back, he wasn't the same man. Some say he did things out there in the desert that no Christian should speak of. Beatrice felt a chill run through her. She had heard stories about what Apache raids could do to settlers, and what grief could drive people to do in response. She thought about Lucas's scars, the old pain in his eyes, and wondered what horrors those steady hands had committed in the name of vengeance. The days fell into a rhythm. Beatrice woke early, worked long hours, ate simple meals alone in her room, and tried not to think about the whiskey bottles she could see lined up behind the bar across the street. Thomas remained distant, but seemed satisfied with her work. His wife, Martha, came by occasionally and was slightly warmer, though there was always a hint of pity in her eyes that Beatrice hated. Lucas came into the store every week or so for supplies. Their conversations were brief, just polite exchanges about the weather or his order, but Beatrice found herself watching for him. There was something about the way he carried himself, that combination of strength and vulnerability, that drew her attention. One evening, about 3 weeks after her arrival, she was locking up the store when she heard shouting from the saloon across the street. This wasn't unusual, but something about the tone made her pause. She saw a crowd gathering outside, heard glass breaking, and then 2 men stumbled out into the street, fighting. One of them was Lucas. He was bleeding from a cut above his eye, his shirt torn, trading blows with a larger man she recognized as one of the ranch hands from the big cattle spread east of town. The crowd was cheering them on, enjoying the spectacle. Lucas got in a solid hit that staggered his opponent, but then the other man pulled a knife. Without thinking, Beatrice grabbed the broom she had just been using and ran across the street. "Stop it!" she shouted. "Stop it right now!" The crowd turned to stare at her. The man with the knife hesitated, and Lucas used the moment to kick the weapon out of his hand. It skittered across the dusty street. Lucas was breathing hard, blood dripping down his face, but when he looked at Beatrice, she saw clarity in his eyes, not the drunken haze she had expected. "Madam, you should go back inside," he said quietly. "Not until you both stop acting like fools." She planted herself between them, gripping the broom handle like a weapon. "Whatever this is about, it's not worth killing each other." The other man spat blood into the dirt. "He called me a liar. Said I was cheating at cards." "You were cheating," Lucas said flatly. "I watched you deal from the bottom of the deck twice." "This ain't none of your concern, lady," the man growled at Beatrice. "It became my concern when you pulled a knife in the middle of town." She turned to Lucas. "And you? Thomas told me you have a ranch to run. How are you going to do that if you're dead or in jail?" Something flickered across Lucas's face, might have been amusement or might have been pain. He wiped blood from his eye. "You're right. I apologize for disturbing your evening, Miss Sullivan." He turned and walked away, heading toward the livery where his horse was stabled. The other man made a move to follow, but the bartender, who had come out to watch, grabbed his arm. "Let it go, Jake. He's right, you were cheating. Count yourself lucky he didn't break more than your nose." The crowd dispersed, disappointed at the anticlimactic ending. Beatrice stood there with her broom, heart pounding, wondering what had possessed her to get involved. She should have stayed in the store, minded her own business, not drawn attention to herself. But she had seen the knife, seen Lucas outnumbered by the crowd's sentiment, and something in her had refused to just watch. She went back to the store, locked the door properly this time, and climbed the stairs to her room. She was shaking, adrenaline still coursing through her. She lit her lamp and sat on the bed, trying to calm her racing heart. 20 minutes later, there was a knock on the outside stairs that led up to her room. She froze, then made herself go to the door. "Who is it?" "Lucas Pierce. I wanted to make sure you're all right, and to thank you." She opened the door a crack. He stood on the small landing, his face cleaned up but already showing signs of bruising. He had changed his shirt and was holding his hat in his hands. In the lamplight, he looked exhausted. "I'm fine," she said. "Are you?" "I've had worse." He managed a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That was brave, what you did. Stupid, maybe, but brave. Jake's mean when he's drinking." "Were you drinking?" The question came out before she could stop it. "No." He said it simply, without defensiveness. "I know what people say about me. Some of it's true. I did drink too much for a long time after Sarah and Emma died, but I haven't touched it in almost a year now. Doesn't stop people from assuming, though." Beatrice opened the door wider. "I understand that. People assuming the worst because of your past." His eyes met hers and she saw understanding there. Real understanding, not pity. "Thomas told you to stay away from me, didn't he?" "Yes." "Probably smart advice." "Probably." She found herself smiling slightly. "But I've never been very good at taking smart advice." They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. The night air was finally cooling after the brutal heat of the day, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Lucas seemed to be working up to saying something, and Beatrice waited, feeling that strange pull toward this scarred, damaged man who somehow felt like the first real person she had met in months. "Can I ask you something?" he finally said. "That day you arrived, when you stepped off the stage, you looked like someone who was running away from something, but also like someone who was afraid there was nothing to run toward. Was I right?" Beatrice felt her throat tighten. No one had seen her that clearly in a very long time. Most people were content to judge the surface, to see the widow who had disgraced herself with drink and leave it at that. But Lucas had looked deeper, had recognized something in her because he carried the same thing himself. "Yes," she whispered. "I lost everything. My husband, my baby, and then myself for a while. I'm trying to find my way back, but I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if you can fix something that broken." Lucas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "After Sarah and Emma died, I wanted to die too. For a long time, I did everything I could to make that happen. Picked fights, took risks, drank until I couldn't feel anything. But I didn't die. I just kept waking up, kept hurting, kept seeing their faces every time I closed my eyes." "What changed?" Beatrice asked softly. "I found a horse that had been abused, left to die in a ravine. Something in me couldn't just walk away. So I saved her, nursed her back to health, taught her to trust again. Took months. And somewhere in the process of healing her, I realized I might be able to heal myself too. Not all the way, maybe never all the way. But enough to keep going, enough to find moments of peace." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. "That's what I want, just moments of peace. I don't even dream of happiness anymore, just the absence of pain." Lucas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back, and touched her hand where it rested on the door frame. His fingers were calloused and warm. "Can you love someone broken?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air between them, enormous and terrifying, and somehow exactly what she needed to hear. Beatrice looked up at him, at this man who had survived horrors and come out the other side damaged but still capable of gentleness, still able to see another person's pain and respond to it. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Can you?" "I'm broken too," Lucas said. "Maybe we could heal together. Not right away, not rushed. But we could try. We could be honest about the pain instead of pretending it doesn't exist. We could help each other find those moments of peace." Beatrice thought about all the reasons she should say no. She barely knew this man. She was in no position to start any kind of relationship, barely keeping her head above water as it was. Thomas would be furious. The town would talk. There were 1,000 practical reasons to step back, close the door, and forget this conversation ever happened. But she was so tired of being alone with her grief, so tired of pretending to be someone she wasn't, of trying to fit into the mold of the properly mournful widow who had appropriately moved on. Lucas was offering something different, something real. The chance to be broken together, to not have to hide the jagged edges. "I'd like that," she said. "To try." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face and gave her a glimpse of who he must have been before tragedy had carved lines of sorrow into his features. "Can I call on you?" "Properly, I mean. Take you for a buggy ride on Sunday, maybe show you the ranch." "Yes," Beatrice said. "I'd like that very much." Lucas squeezed her hand gently and then let go. "Sunday, then. I'll come by around 10 if that suits you. I'll be ready." He put his hat back on and headed down the stairs. Beatrice watched him go, watched him climb onto his horse and ride out of town toward his ranch. She stood there long after he had disappeared into the darkness, her hand still tingling where he had touched it, feeling something she had thought was dead inside her stirring back to life: hope. The next few days dragged by with agonizing slowness. Beatrice went through her work mechanically, her mind constantly drifting to Sunday. She knew she was being foolish, knew she barely knew Lucas, knew that Thomas would be furious when he found out. But she couldn't help the flutter of anticipation in her chest every time she thought about seeing him again. Thomas noticed her distraction on Friday and commented on it sourly. "You've been mooning around like a schoolgirl. If you can't keep your mind on your work, perhaps we need to reconsider this arrangement." "I apologize," Beatrice said quickly. "It won't happen again." But Saturday was even worse. She caught herself checking her reflection in the store window, wondering if her hair looked all right, if her dress was too shabby. She only had 3 dresses to her name, and none of them were particularly nice. The thought of Lucas seeing her in broad daylight, really seeing her, made her nervous in a way that was both pleasant and terrifying. Saturday evening, Martha Sullivan came by the store just as Beatrice was closing up. She was a thin woman with graying hair and kind eyes that always seemed a little sad. She looked at Beatrice carefully and then said, "Walk with me a moment, dear." They strolled down the street together as the sun set, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple. Martha was quiet for a while, then said, "Thomas mentioned that Lucas Pierce spoke to you after that fight earlier this week." Beatrice's heart sank, so he knew. "Yes, he came to apologize for disturbing me. And there was no point in lying. Martha would find out eventually, and Beatrice was tired of deception. And he asked if he could call on me. I said yes. He's taking me for a buggy ride tomorrow." Martha nodded slowly. "I thought it might be something like that. Thomas is going to be very angry when he finds out." "I know. But Martha, I can't live my life trying to please Thomas. I'm grateful for the work and the room, but I can't be the person he wants me to be. I tried that already, tried to be the perfect grieving widow, and it nearly destroyed me." "I know, dear, I know," Martha sighed. "Thomas is a good man in many ways, but he's rigid. He sees the world in black and white, right and wrong, with no room for the complexity of real human suffering. He loved Robert deeply, and when you turned to drink after losing your baby, he saw it as weakness rather than grief." "And what do you see it as?" Beatrice asked quietly. "I see it as a woman who was drowning and grabbed onto the only thing that offered to numb the pain, even though it was poison. I see it as human. And I see you fighting your way back now, which takes more strength than Thomas will ever understand." Martha paused, then added, "I also see Lucas Pierce, a man who knows exactly what drowning feels like. Thomas calls him dangerous and damaged. I call him a survivor, same as you." Beatrice felt tears sting her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Be careful, though," Martha warned gently. Not because I think Lucas will hurt you, but because healing is hard work and doing it alongside someone else who's also healing can be complicated. You'll both have bad days. You'll both have moments when the pain seems bigger than anything else. Don't give up on each other when that happens. I'll try, Beatrice promised. Sunday morning dawned clear and hot. Beatrice woke early and took extra care with her appearance, washing her hair and wearing her best dress, a dark green cotton that had been her favorite before Robert died. It was a little loose now. She had lost weight during her months of drinking and hadn't quite gained it all back, but it was clean and pressed and made her eyes look brighter. She was ready by 9:30 and spent the next half hour pacing her small room, second-guessing everything. What if this was a mistake? What if Thomas threw her out? What if she and Lucas had nothing to talk about in the light of day? What if the connection she had felt was just loneliness and desperation? At exactly 10 o'clock, she heard the sound of a buggy pulling up outside. She grabbed her bonnet and hurried down the outside stairs, not wanting Lucas to have to come inside and potentially run into Thomas. Lucas was waiting beside a well-maintained buggy pulled by a pretty bay mare. He had cleaned up, shaved, and was wearing what were clearly his best clothes, a white shirt and dark trousers with a leather vest. He smiled when he saw her, and some of Beatrice's nervousness faded. "Morning," he said. "You look lovely." "Thank you, so do you." She felt herself blushing and took his offered hand to climb up into the buggy. They headed out of town, taking the north road Lucas had mentioned their first meeting. The desert stretched out around them, beautiful in its harsh way, all red rock and scrub brush and endless sky. The heat was already building, but there was a light breeze that made it bearable. For a while, they rode in comfortable silence. Lucas handled the reins with easy competence, and Beatrice found herself relaxing, just enjoying the simple pleasure of being out of town, away from Thomas's disapproval and the confining walls of her small room. "Tell me about Kansas," Lucas said eventually. "What was your life like before?" Beatrice took a breath. "Robert and I married when I was 19. He was a school teacher, good and kind and steady. We were happy, or I thought we were. We wanted children, but it took a long time for me to conceive. When I finally did, we were both overjoyed, but the pregnancy was difficult. I was sick constantly, and toward the end, I could barely move. Robert caught pneumonia that winter, and I was too far along to help care for him properly. He died 3 days before I went into labor." Her voice caught, and Lucas reached over and took her hand, keeping the reins steady with his other hand. She held on tight and continued. "The labor was long and hard. They told me afterward that I was unconscious for most of it. When I woke up, my daughter was dead. She had been stillborn, they said. I never even got to hold her while she was alive. They buried her next to Robert while I was still too weak to leave my bed." "I'm so sorry," Lucas said quietly. "No one should have to bear that. I couldn't cope. For weeks, I just lay there wishing I had died too. Then someone gave me whiskey to help me sleep, and I discovered that if I drank enough, I couldn't feel anything. So I kept drinking. My family tried to help at first, but I pushed them away. I said terrible things, did terrible things. Eventually, they stopped trying. Thomas wrote to say there was work here if I could get sober. It was my last chance, so I stopped drinking, packed what little I had left, and came here." They had reached Lucas's ranch by then, a modest spread with a barn, a small house, and several corrals. Beatrice could see horses grazing in a fenced pasture, maybe a dozen of them in various colors. Lucas pulled the buggy to a stop in front of the house and helped her down. "That's the mare I told you about," he said, pointing to a dappled gray horse standing apart from the others. "Her name is Willow. When I found her, she was half-starved and terrified of people. Now she's the gentlest horse I own." Beatrice watched the mare, saw the way she held herself with quiet dignity despite the scars visible on her flanks. She's beautiful. She taught me that broken things can heal if you give them time and patience and kindness. Lucas looked at Beatrice. Your turn. Tell me about Sarah and Emma. They walked slowly around the property as Lucas talked. His voice was steady, but Beatrice could hear the pain underneath. Sarah and I grew up together. She was the daughter of the preacher in the town where I was raised, over in New Mexico territory. We married when I was 22 and she was 20. Emma was born a year later. She had Sarah's red hair and my gray eyes, and she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. He paused, his jaw working. Beatrice waited, not pushing. They had stopped near a small, fenced grave plot behind the house, two simple wooden crosses marking the places where Lucas's family rested. We had a small ranch, not much different from this one. I was in town getting supplies when the raiding party came through. By the time I got back, he stopped, took a breath. They were both gone. Sarah had fought to protect Emma, I could see that, but it hadn't been enough. I buried them here because Sarah had always loved this land. And then you went after them, Beatrice said softly, remembering what Thomas had told her. Yes, I tracked them for 3 weeks. I won't tell you what I did when I found them. Those actions are between me and God, and I'll answer for them when my time comes. When I finally came back here, I was more monster than man. I drank to forget, fought to feel something other than rage and grief. It took a long time to find my way back to anything resembling human. Beatrice moved closer to him, took his hand. But you did find your way back. Mostly. He looked down at their joined hands. I still have nightmares, still have days when the anger feels like it could swallow me whole. Still feel like part of me died out there in that desert and didn't come back. But I keep going. I take care of the horses, work the ranch, try to be a decent man even when I don't feel like one. It's not much, but it's all I have. It's more than you think, Beatrice said. You saved Willow. You were kind to me when you had no reason to be. You're still here, still trying, even though it would be easier to give up. That takes real courage. Lucas turned to face her fully, reached up with his free hand and gently touched her cheek. I meant what I said the other night. I'm drawn to you, Beatrice. Not because I think you can fix me or I can fix you, but because when I look at you, I see someone who understands. Someone who knows what it's like to lose everything and have to decide whether to keep going or just lie down and die. You chose to keep going. That makes you one of the strongest people I've ever met. Beatrice felt tears spill over. No one had called her strong in so long. Everyone saw her as weak, broken, someone to be pitied or scorned. But Lucas saw something different. He saw a survivor. I'm afraid, she whispered. I'm afraid of feeling too much, of opening myself up and losing everything again. I'm afraid of being a burden to you, of my darkness pulling you back down when you've worked so hard to climb out. I'm afraid too, Lucas admitted. Afraid of the same things. But Beatrice, what if we could face those fears together? What if by sharing the burden, we both carry a little less? I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow or make any promises you're not ready for. I'm just asking if you'll let me be part of your life. Let me be someone you can be honest with, who you don't have to hide your pain from. And maybe, if we're lucky, we can find those moments of peace together. She looked up at him, at his scarred face and haunted eyes and gentle hands, and felt something inside her shift and settle into place. This was right. This damaged man and his hard-won wisdom, his horses and his small ranch and his understanding of what it meant to be broken. This was what she had come to Arizona to find, even though she hadn't known it. Yes, she said. Yes, I want that. Lucas smiled, that transformation she had seen before, and then he leaned down and kissed her softly. His lips were warm and gentle, asking rather than demanding, and Beatrice felt something bloom inside her chest. Not the wild passion of youth, but something deeper and more sustainable. Recognition. Partnership. The beginning of healing. They spent the rest of the day at the ranch. Lucas showed her around properly, introduced her to each of the horses by name and personality. He made lunch, simple fare of bread and cheese and apples, and they ate sitting on his porch, watching the horses graze and talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his plans to expand the ranch, breed horses specifically for endurance rather than speed. She told him about her love of reading, how books had been her escape during the darkest times. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Lucas drove her back to town. They were both quiet, comfortable with the silence, hands loosely clasped between them. When they reached the store, Thomas was standing outside, his face thunderous. "Where have you been?" he demanded as soon as Beatrice climbed down from the buggy. "I told Martha I was going out for the day," Beatrice said calmly, though her heart was racing. "With him?" Thomas glared at Lucas. "I warned you to stay away from her, Pierce. She's a decent woman, a widow, not one of your saloon girls." Lucas's expression went cold. "I'm aware of what she is, Sullivan, and I've been nothing but respectful. We went for a buggy ride and spent the day at my ranch, that's all. That's all." Thomas's voice dripped with sarcasm. "You expect me to believe that, Thomas, enough." Beatrice was surprised by the firmness in her own voice. "Lucas has been a perfect gentleman, and even if he hadn't been, it's not your business. You're my employer, not my father or my husband. I appreciate the work and the room, but that doesn't give you the right to control who I spend my time with." Thomas's face turned red. "If you're going to act like a harlot, you can find somewhere else to live and work. I won't have you bringing more shame to the Sullivan name." The words hit like a physical blow. Beatrice felt herself sway, felt all her hard-won stability threatening to crumble. She had nowhere else to go, no money saved up yet, no other prospects. If Thomas threw her out, she would be destitute. "She'll come stay at my ranch," Lucas said quietly. "I have a spare room. She'll be properly chaperoned. I'll bring Mrs. Henderson from the neighboring property to stay there as well if that's what it takes. But I won't stand here and let you call her names because she dared to spend a day with someone who treats her with kindness. Your ranch." Thomas laughed harshly. "So she can ruin what's left of her reputation. No decent man will ever have her if she does that." "I'm a decent man," Lucas said, his voice hard now, "and I want her. Not someday, not maybe. Now, Beatrice, will you marry me?" The world seemed to stop. Beatrice stared at Lucas, at his set jaw and fierce eyes and the determination in every line of his body. They had known each other for less than a month. They had spent one day together. This was madness, reckless and impulsive and completely illogical. And yet, she thought about the connection she had felt from the first moment she saw him. The way he understood her darkness because he carried his own. The gentleness in his hands when he touched her, the respect in his eyes when he looked at her. The way he had stood up for her just now, offering her not just shelter but his name, his protection, his partnership. She thought about the alternative. Going back to her small room above the store, living under Thomas's disdain and disapproval, working 6 days a week for barely enough to survive, always walking on eggshells, always afraid of making a mistake that would get her thrown out anyway. Alone with her grief, pretending to be something she wasn't, Lucas was offering her a different path, a harder one in some ways, because healing together meant being vulnerable and honest and brave. But also a path that led somewhere that offered the possibility of real peace, real happiness, real love. "Yes," she said clearly. "Yes, Lucas, I'll marry you." Thomas made a disgusted sound. "You're both fools. Don't come crawling back to me when this falls apart." "We won't," Lucas said. He climbed down from the buggy and held out his hand to Beatrice. Get your things. You're done here." Beatrice went up to her room one last time. It didn't take long to pack. She had arrived with one small bag, and that was still all she had. She looked around the sparse space that had been her home for a month, feeling no regret at leaving it. Whatever happened with Lucas, it had to be better than this. Martha was waiting at the bottom of the stairs when Beatrice came down. She pressed a bundle into Beatrice's hands. "A few things for your new home, towels and such, and this." She handed over a small leather purse. "It's not much, just what I've been able to save from my household money, but it's yours, for a new dress or whatever you need." "Martha, I can't," Beatrice protested. "You can and you will. Thomas is my husband and I love him, but he's wrong about this. You deserve happiness, Beatrice. You and Lucas both do." Martha pulled her into a quick hug. "Be happy, dear, and don't be a stranger. You can visit me anytime." Lucas was waiting with the buggy. He took Beatrice's bag and helped her up. Then they left Hallbrook behind, heading out into the gathering dusk toward the ranch. Beatrice looked back once, saw Martha waving from the doorway of the store, and then focused forward, toward the future, uncertain and frightening and full of possibility. They reached the ranch as full darkness fell. Lucas lit lamps inside the house while Beatrice stood awkwardly in the main room, suddenly unsure. Everything had happened so fast. A few hours ago, she had been an employee living above a store. Now she was engaged to a man she barely knew, about to spend the night in his house. Lucas must have sensed her nervousness because he said, "The spare room is through here. It's small but clean. I'll get a fire going if you're cold." "I'm fine," Beatrice said. "Lucas, are you sure about this? We barely know each other. Maybe we're both just lonely and we're mistaking that for something else." He crossed the room and took both her hands in his. "I've been lonely for 5 years. I've met plenty of women in that time, some who made it clear they'd be interested if I was. But I never felt drawn to any of them. Then you stepped off that stage and I saw something in you that called to me. Not because I think you can save me or make everything better, but because I think we could save each other, make each other better. Is it fast? Yes. Is it risky? Absolutely. But Beatrice, I've learned that life is short and unpredictable, and sometimes you have to take chances on the things that matter. You matter to me. Already you matter to me." Beatrice felt tears threaten again. "You matter to me too. I just don't want to disappoint you. I'm not healed yet, Lucas. I still have days when I want to drink so badly I can barely think straight. I still wake up crying sometimes, missing my daughter, missing who I used to be before grief broke me. I don't want you to think you're getting someone whole and put together, because I'm not." "Good," Lucas said. "Because I'm not either. I still have nightmares about the raid, about what I did afterward. I still have moments when the anger rises up and I want to hurt something. I'm not a gentle man by nature, Beatrice. What I did in that desert changed me, made me capable of violence I never thought I'd commit. I don't want you to think you're getting some kind of hero." "I don't need a hero," Beatrice said. "I just need someone who's honest, someone who won't judge me on my worst days. Someone who understands that healing isn't a straight line." "Then we're agreed." Lucas squeezed her hands gently. "Now let me show you your room, and then I'll make us some dinner. We'll get married as soon as we can arrange it, but until then, everything is proper and above board. I mean what I said about bringing Mrs. Henderson over if you want a chaperone." "I trust you," Beatrice said simply, and saw the impact of those words in his eyes. The spare room was indeed small, but it had a real bed with clean sheets, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the horse pastures. Lucas brought her bag in and then left her alone to settle in. Beatrice sat on the bed, trying to process everything that had happened in one day. This morning, she had been a shop girl living in a hot, tiny room above her brother-in-law's store. Now she was betrothed to a horse rancher, living in his home, about to start a completely different life. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt calm, as if some part of her had recognized that this was where she was supposed to be, even if the path here had been unexpected. She washed her face and hands, changed into her nightgown and robe, and went back out to the main room. Lucas had laid out a simple meal of stew and bread. They ate together at his small table, talking quietly about practical things. He would ride into town tomorrow and speak to the preacher about performing a wedding ceremony. They would need a marriage license, which meant going to the county seat, but that could wait until after the ceremony itself. In the meantime, he would ask his neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, to come stay for a few days to satisfy propriety. "You don't have to do that," Beatrice said. "I know it's an imposition on her, and honestly, I don't care what people think anymore." "I care," Lucas said. "Not because I doubt my own intentions or yours, but because I don't want anyone to have cause to speak badly of you. You've dealt with enough judgment. I can do this one thing to protect you from more." Beatrice felt warmth spread through her chest. When was the last time someone had tried to protect her, not from physical danger but from the cruelty of gossip and judgment? Robert had loved her, but he had been passive, accepting of whatever came. Lucas was different. He was a fighter, someone who had survived terrible things and come out stronger, scarred but not broken beyond repair. They finished eating and Lucas walked her to the door of her room. He kissed her forehead gently. "Sleep well, Beatrice. Tomorrow we start building our life together." She slept better than she had in months, lulled by the quiet of the ranch and the feeling of safety she hadn't experienced in a very long time. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Lucas rode into town and spoke to the preacher, who was surprisingly understanding about the quick courtship. Mrs. Henderson, a widow in her 60s who ran a small farm neighboring the Pierce Ranch, agreed to stay at the house until after the wedding. She was a no-nonsense woman with kind eyes who took one look at Beatrice and Lucas and said, "About time someone brought some life back to this place. Sarah would be glad to know you're moving forward, Lucas." The mention of Sarah's name made Beatrice nervous. Was she dishonoring the first wife's memory by being here? But Mrs. Henderson must have seen her expression because she added, "Don't you fret, dear. Sarah was my friend, and she wouldn't have wanted Lucas to mourn forever. She'd want him to be happy. And you look like someone who understands what he's been through. That's worth more than anything." They were married on a Saturday morning 3 weeks after Lucas's proposal, in the small church in Hallbrook with Mrs. Henderson and Martha Sullivan as witnesses. Thomas refused to attend, but Martha came and brought flowers from her garden. The ceremony was simple, just the traditional vows and a prayer. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas kissed Beatrice softly, and she felt tears of joy rather than sorrow for the first time in years. They had a small celebration at the ranch afterward. Mrs. Henderson had helped Beatrice prepare a meal, and a few of Lucas's friends from neighboring ranches came by to congratulate them. Beatrice was overwhelmed by the warmth of these people, the way they welcomed her without judgment or questions about her past. Lucas had clearly told them enough that they understood this was a second chance for both of them. As evening fell and the guests departed, Beatrice found herself alone with her new husband for the first time as a married couple. Mrs. Henderson had packed her things and gone home, leaving them to their wedding night. Beatrice felt nervous in a way she hadn't expected. She had been married before, this shouldn't be new or frightening, but everything about this felt different. Lucas seemed to sense her nervousness. "We don't have to rush anything," he said gently. "This is a marriage built on healing and partnership, not just physical desire. I want you, Beatrice, make no mistake about that, but I also want you to feel safe and comfortable. so we'll go at whatever pace feels right to you." Beatrice looked at this man who had offered her everything without demanding anything in return. This man who understood that healing took time, that trust had to be built slowly. She crossed the room to where he stood and took his hands. "I want to be your wife in every way," she said. "I'm nervous, yes. Not because I don't want this, but because it's been so long since I've felt anything like desire or joy in physical connection. But I trust you, Lucas. I trust you to be gentle with me, with all the broken parts of me." He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, slow and deep and full of promise. "I'll spend the rest of my life being gentle with you," he murmured against her lips, "and I'll trust you to be gentle with my broken parts too." They moved together into the bedroom, and Beatrice discovered that intimacy could be different than she had known before. Robert had been kind but somewhat mechanical, their physical relationship pleasant but not particularly passionate. Lucas was different. He was patient and attentive, taking time to learn what brought her pleasure, being open about what he wanted in return. When they finally came together, it was with a sense of rightness that made Beatrice's breath catch in her throat. Afterward, lying in Lucas's arms in the darkness, Beatrice felt more at peace than she could remember. Lucas's fingers traced gentle patterns on her shoulder, and she could hear his heartbeat under her ear, steady and strong. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me. For not giving up when you could have. For offering me this chance at a new life." "Thank you for taking the chance," Lucas replied. "For being brave enough to say yes when everything was moving so fast. For trusting me with your heart when you had every reason to keep it guarded." They fell asleep tangled together, two broken people finding comfort in each other's arms. The early months of their marriage were not easy. Beatrice had nightmares about her daughter, would wake up crying and disoriented. Lucas would hold her through them, whispering comfort until she calmed. He had his own nightmares, violent and terrifying, and would sometimes wake up swinging before he fully regained consciousness. Beatrice learned to wake him from a safe distance, speaking his name softly until he came back to himself. There were days when Beatrice craved whiskey so intensely she could barely function. On those days, Lucas would harness the buggy and take her for long drives into the desert, letting the vast emptiness and harsh beauty distract her from the craving. He never judged her for it, never made her feel weak. He just stayed close, a steady presence reminding her she wasn't alone. There were days when Lucas's anger would spike, usually triggered by something random, a sound or smell that reminded him of the raid. He would disappear into the barn or out to work with the horses, coming back hours later exhausted and subdued. Beatrice learned not to take it personally, to give him space when he needed it, but also to be there when he returned. Slowly, painfully, they learned each other's rhythms. Learned how to support without smothering, how to give space without abandoning. They talked more honestly than Beatrice had ever talked with anyone, sharing their fears and hopes and the tiny victories of each day. When Beatrice went a whole week without craving drink, they celebrated. When Lucas made it through a night without nightmares, they acknowledged it as progress. 6 months into their marriage, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. The discovery sent her into a panic. She told Lucas immediately, unable to hide her fear. "What if I lose this baby too? What if history repeats itself? I don't think I could survive it again, Lucas. I barely survived it the first time." Lucas held her close, his own face pale with concern. "We'll get through it together," he said firmly. "Whatever happens, you won't face it alone. And Beatrice, there's no reason to think the same thing will happen. You're healthy, we'll get the best care available, and we'll take every precaution." He was true to his word. He brought in a midwife from Winslow, a woman with 30 years of experience who examined Beatrice thoroughly and declared her fit and healthy. Lucas insisted Beatrice rest more, take on less of the heavy ranch work she had started helping with. He was attentive to the point of being almost smothering, until Beatrice gently told him he needed to trust that she would tell him if something was wrong. The pregnancy progressed normally, and slowly Beatrice's fear began to ease. She found herself able to imagine a future where she held a living baby in her arms, where she and Lucas became parents together. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Lucas was dealing with his own fears, she realized. He never spoke them aloud, but she could see them in his eyes when he looked at her growing belly. He was afraid of losing another child, another wife, afraid that happiness was something he wasn't allowed to keep. Beatrice tried to reassure him, but she understood that some fears couldn't be reasoned away. They could only be faced when the moment came. Their first son was born on a cool March morning in 1883, a year after Beatrice had arrived in Hallbrook. The labor was long but nothing like the nightmare of her first. She was conscious and aware through all of it, Lucas holding her hand and murmuring encouragement. When the midwife placed the squalling, red-faced infant in her arms, Beatrice broke down sobbing. "He's alive," she kept saying. "He's alive, Lucas, he's really alive." Lucas was crying too, tears streaming down his face as he touched his son's tiny hand. "He's perfect, Beatrice, he's perfect." They named him James Robert Pierce, honoring both their fathers. He was a healthy baby with Lucas's dark hair and what would eventually become Beatrice's blue eyes. Holding him, watching Lucas cradle him with such gentle reverence, Beatrice felt something inside her heal. Not completely, she would always carry the grief of losing her first daughter, but enough that she could breathe without pain, could look forward to tomorrow without dread. The next few years were the happiest of Beatrice's life. James grew into a sturdy toddler, full of energy and curiosity. The ranch prospered as Lucas's reputation for training quality horses spread. They added on to the house, creating more space as their family grew. A second son, Samuel Thomas, was born 2 years after James, and then a daughter, Emma Sarah, named for the loved ones they had lost. Watching Lucas with Emma was bittersweet. He was tender with all his children, but with Emma, there was an added layer of wonder and grief. Sometimes Beatrice would catch him just staring at her, tears in his eyes, and she knew he was thinking about the first Emma, the daughter he had lost. But he never pulled away from this Emma, never let his fear keep him from loving her fully. They still had hard days. Beatrice's anniversary of losing Robert and her first daughter was always difficult. Lucas's anniversary of the raid that killed Sarah and his first Emma was even worse. They learned to prepare for these days, to be extra gentle with each other, to understand that grief didn't disappear just because new joy had arrived. But the good days far outnumbered the bad now. Days of watching their children play in the yard while horses grazed in the pasture. Days of working side by side, mending fences or breaking in a new colt. Nights of falling into bed exhausted but content, wrapped in each other's arms and knowing they were exactly where they belonged. When Emma was 3 years old, Beatrice found herself pregnant again. This time there was no panic, just quiet anticipation. She knew her body now, knew what to expect. Lucas was still protective but more relaxed, trusting that things would work out. Their second daughter, Grace Ann, was born in the summer of 1888. She had her father's gray eyes and her mother's honey-colored hair. And from the moment she arrived, she ruled the household with her sunny disposition and infectious laughter. One evening, when Grace was about 6 months old, Beatrice was sitting on the porch nursing the baby while Lucas played with the older children in the yard. James was 10 now, tall and serious like his father. Samuel was 8, wilder and more adventurous. Emma was 5, already showing signs of her father's way with horses. They were chasing each other around, laughing and shrieking, while Lucas pretended to be a monster trying to catch them. Watching them, Beatrice felt a wave of emotion so intense it nearly overwhelmed her. This was her family. These people, this place, this life she had built from the ashes of her old one. She thought about the woman who had stepped off the stage coach 6 years ago, broken and desperate and barely holding on. That woman wouldn't have believed this was possible. Lucas must have sensed her emotion because he looked up and caught her eye. He said something to the children, who groaned but went back to playing without him and came up onto the porch. He sat down next to Beatrice, draping an arm around her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" He asked softly. "How lucky I am. How different my life could have been if I hadn't met you." She leaned into him, careful not to disturb Grace's nursing. "Do you remember that night you came to my room after the fight? You asked me if you could love someone broken." "I remember." "I didn't really answer you then. I said I didn't know. But I know now, Lucas. Not only can you love someone broken, sometimes that's the only kind of love that really works, because we understand each other's scars. We don't expect perfection. We're just grateful for every good day, every moment of peace, every small victory." Lucas kissed the top of her head. "I asked you if we could heal together. Looks like we did." "We're still healing," Beatrice corrected gently. "I don't think the work is ever really done. But yes, we're doing it together, and that makes all the difference." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the desert and their children play. Grace finished nursing and fell asleep in Beatrice's arms, milk-drunk and peaceful. Inside the house, dinner was waiting to be served. Tomorrow would bring the usual ranch work, the usual challenges and small triumphs. But right now, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The years continued to pass. James grew into a responsible young man who took over more and more of the ranch work, showing a natural talent for horse training that made his father proud. Samuel was less interested in ranching and more drawn to books and learning. So when he turned 16, Lucas and Beatrice arranged for him to apprentice with the new schoolteacher in Hallbrook. Emma stayed on the ranch, working alongside her father and developing his same gentle way with difficult horses. Grace remained the sunshine of the family, her laughter and joy a constant reminder of how far they had all come. Lucas's hair started to gray at the temples, and lines deepened around his eyes. But they were laugh lines now, not just marks of pain. The old scars were still there, on his body and in his mind, but they had faded into the background, part of his history but not the defining feature of his present. Beatrice had her own gray hairs and the soft roundness of a woman who had borne 4 children. She still had moments when grief would hit her unexpectedly, usually triggered by something random like a particular flower or a child's laugh. But those moments were gentler now, touched with gratitude for what she had rather than consumed by what she had lost. They celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary in the spring of 1892. The children helped decorate the house with wildflowers, and Mrs. Henderson, still spry in her 70s, came over to help make a special dinner. Martha Sullivan came too, though Thomas had passed away 2 years earlier from a heart ailment. Martha had softened even more after his death, becoming a frequent visitor to the ranch and a beloved grandmother figure to the children. That night, after the children were in bed and the guests had gone home, Lucas and Beatrice sat together on the porch as they had so many times over the years. Lucas took Beatrice's hand and held it gently. "You remember what I said to you that first night?" he asked. "About finding moments of peace. I remember. You said you didn't dream of happiness anymore, just the absence of pain. I was wrong. Lucas brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. Or maybe not wrong, but I underestimated what was possible. I have more than moments of peace now, Beatrice. I have days of it, weeks sometimes. And I have happiness, real happiness, the kind I thought I'd never feel again. You gave me that. This family gave me that. Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind that came from overwhelming gratitude. You gave me the same thing. More than that, you gave me back myself, the version of me that could hope and dream and believe in tomorrow. You loved me when I was broken, and you helped me put the pieces back together. Not back into who I was before, I'll never be her again, but into someone new, someone stronger because of what I survived. We survived it together, Lucas corrected. And we'll keep surviving whatever comes together. That's the promise we made, and I mean to keep it. They kissed as the stars came out over the desert. Two people who had found each other in the darkest time of their lives and built something beautiful from the wreckage. The old wounds would always be there, faded scars that ached sometimes. The memories of Sarah and Emma, of Robert and baby Rose, would never fully fade. But alongside those losses, they had created a new family, a new life, new memories bright enough to balance the shadows of the past. Inside the house, they could hear Grace crying out from a bad dream. Emma's voice soothed her, the older sister comforting the younger, and then quiet fell again. Their children were safe and loved, growing up in a home built on honesty and resilience, and the hard-won knowledge that broken things could heal. Lucas stood and pulled Beatrice to her feet. Come on. Let's check on them, make sure everyone's settled, and then get some sleep ourselves. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day. Every day is busy, Beatrice said with a smile. True, but it's a good kind of busy. The kind that means we're living, really living, not just existing. They walked inside together, checking on each child and tucking blankets, smoothing hair, pressing gentle kisses to sleeping foreheads. James was sprawled across his bed with a book still open beside him. Samuel had fallen asleep at his desk, pen still in hand, working on an essay for his studies. Emma was curled up with her well-loved stuffed horse. Grace had her thumb in her mouth, peaceful now after her nightmare. Beatrice stood in the doorway of Grace's room for a long moment, just watching her youngest daughter sleep. She thought about all the nights she had dreamed of this, of having a living child to tuck in, of being part of a family again. She thought about the first time she had held baby Rose's still body, the moment she had been certain her life was over. If someone had told her then that she would find love again, would have more children, would build a life full of joy and purpose, she wouldn't have believed them. But here she was. Here they all were. Lucas came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. What are you thinking? That I'm grateful. For all of it, even the pain that brought me here. Because without that pain, without being broken, I never would have met you. I never would have understood how strong I actually am. I never would have learned that healing is possible, even when it seems impossible. I'm grateful too, Lucas murmured. For you, for them, for this life. I spent so long thinking I was being punished for failing Sarah and Emma. But maybe I wasn't being punished. Maybe I was just being tested, forged in fire so I'd be strong enough to build this. To be the man you and these children needed me to be. They stood there together, watching their daughter sleep, holding each other in the quiet darkness. Outside, the desert night was alive with the sounds of crickets and the distant cry of a coyote. The horses stirred in their pasture, peaceful and content. The ranch that had once been a lonely place haunted by grief had become a home full of life and love. Eventually, they made their way to their own bedroom, the room they had shared for 10 years now. They undressed and climbed into bed, fitting together with the ease of long practice. Lucas's arms around her, Beatrice's head on his chest, the familiar comfort of skin on skin and breath matching breath. "I love you," Beatrice whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Lucas replied. "Broken pieces and all, broken pieces and all," she agreed and closed her eyes. They slept the deep, peaceful sleep of people who had fought hard for their happiness and knew its value. People who understood that healing was a journey, not a destination, and that the journey was easier when you had someone to walk beside you. People who had asked if you could love someone broken and discovered that not only could you, but sometimes that broken love was the strongest kind of all. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Beatrice woke to find Lucas already up, could hear him moving around in the kitchen starting breakfast. She stretched, feeling the pleasant ache of a body well used and well loved, and smiled. Grace was calling for her mother, and Emma was trying to hush her so Mama could sleep a little longer. James's voice joined in, teasing his sisters, and Samuel was laughing at something. Her family. Her loud, chaotic, beautiful family. Beatrice got up and dressed, pinned up her hair, and went out to join them. Lucas looked up as she entered the kitchen, his face lighting up the way it always did when he saw her. He handed her a cup of coffee, kissed her cheek, and went back to flipping pancakes while the children clamored for her attention. This was her life now. Not perfect, never perfect, because perfect didn't exist, but real and honest and full of the kind of love that came from truly knowing another person, scars and all. The kind of love that said, "I see your broken pieces and I'll help you carry them." The kind of love that said, "We'll heal together, one day at a time, for the rest of our lives." And in the golden morning light of their Arizona ranch, surrounded by the family they had built from loss and pain and stubborn hope, Beatrice knew that they had succeeded. They had taken two shattered lives and forged them into something whole and beautiful and lasting. They had healed together, just as they had promised they would. The years continued their steady march. The ranch grew and prospered, Lucas's reputation spreading far enough that people came from several territories over to buy his horses or have him train their own. James took on more responsibility until, by the time he was 20, he was effectively running the day-to-day operations. Lucas was proud but also slightly wistful, recognizing that his son no longer needed him in quite the same way. "They're supposed to grow up and become independent," Beatrice reminded him gently one evening. "That's what we raised them for." "I know," Lucas said. "Doesn't make it easier to watch." But he adapted, as he always did. He started taking on special projects, working with horses that other trainers had given up on, the ones with trauma or fear that made them dangerous. He had a gift for reaching those animals, probably because he understood what it felt like to be broken and defensive. Samuel finished his education and surprised everyone by deciding to stay in Hallbrook and take over the schoolhouse when the previous teacher retired. He married a sweet girl from one of the neighboring ranches, and they set up house in town. Emma showed no interest in marrying, preferring to work with the horses and help her father with his special projects. She was 21 now, and Beatrice had stopped hinting about finding a nice young man. "I'm happy as I am, Mama," Emma said firmly. "Maybe someday I'll meet someone who understands that the horses come first, but until then, I'm not settling." Grace, at 14, was showing signs of wanting to follow Samuel's path into teaching. She was bright and patient, wonderful with the younger children in town, and Beatrice could easily see her running the schoolhouse someday. Beatrice herself had taken on a new project. She had started writing down the stories of the women in the area, the pioneers and survivors who had carved out lives in this harsh land. Some were widows like herself. Others had survived Indian attacks or disease or childbirth gone wrong. All had stories of resilience that Beatrice felt needed to be preserved. She had filled several journals and was thinking about trying to get them published, though she wasn't sure anyone would be interested in the quiet heroism of ordinary women. Lucas encouraged her, just as she had always encouraged his work with the horses. They had built a partnership over the years that went beyond just marriage. They were true companions, each supporting the other's dreams and ambitions, each providing strength when the other faltered. They were sitting on the porch one evening in the fall of 1895, the air finally cooling after the brutal summer heat, when Martha came riding up in her buggy. She was in her 70s now, still sharp-minded but moving more slowly. Beatrice hurried down to help her, but Martha waved her off. "I'm not decrepit yet, girl. Just wanted to bring you something." She pulled a bundle wrapped in oilcloth from her buggy and handed it to Beatrice. "I've been cleaning out the house, getting rid of things I don't need anymore. Found this in a trunk. I think you should have it." Beatrice unwrapped the bundle and found herself looking at a beautiful quilt, clearly very old but well preserved. The pattern was intricate, stars and diamonds in shades of blue and gold. "It was Sarah's," Martha said softly. "Lucas's first wife. She made it the year before she died. I've been keeping it safe all these years, but I think it belongs at the ranch now. Not to replace you or make you feel like you're competing with her memory, but because she was part of the history of this place, and her memory deserves to be honored." Beatrice felt tears sting her eyes. She looked at Lucas, who had come down from the porch and was staring at the quilt with an expression of mingled pain and wonder. "I remember this," he said quietly. "She worked on it every evening that winter, said she wanted something beautiful to pass down to Emma." "And now you have another Emma who can treasure it," Martha said. "Along with the children who came after. Sarah would want her work to be loved and used, not locked away in a trunk." Lucas reached out and touched the quilt gently, running his fingers over stitches his first wife had made so many years ago. Then he looked at Beatrice. "What do you think?" "I think Martha's right," Beatrice said. "Sarah was part of your life, part of what made you who you are. Her memory belongs here, just like Robert's does. We can honor what came before while still celebrating what we have now." They took the quilt inside and spread it over the bed in Emma's room. When Emma came in from the barn and saw it, she was struck silent, just staring at the beautiful workmanship. "This was made by your first sister," Beatrice told her gently. "By the first Emma, your father's daughter with his first wife. She died before she got to use it, but I think she would be happy knowing it's being loved by another Emma." Emma touched the quilt reverently. "Tell me about her," she said to Lucas. "Tell me about my sister." Lucas sat down on the edge of the bed and began to talk. He spoke about the first Emma's red hair and gray eyes, how she had loved to sing even though she couldn't carry a tune, how she had been fearless and wild and full of joy. He spoke about Sarah too, about their life together, the love they had shared, the plans they had made. Beatrice listened from the doorway, her heart full. This was healing too, she realized. The ability to honor the past without being trapped by it. To acknowledge that love didn't end just because someone died, but it also didn't prevent new love from growing. Lucas would always carry Sarah and his first Emma in his heart, just as Beatrice would always carry Robert and Rose. But there was room in their hearts for the present too, for the family they had built together. That night, lying in bed, Lucas pulled Beatrice close. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not being jealous of Sarah, for understanding that I can love her memory and still love you completely. Some women wouldn't have been able to accept that." "I love Robert's memory," Beatrice said simply. "I understand that the heart is big enough for both grief and joy, both past and present. We're not competing with ghosts, Lucas. We're just making room for the whole truth of who we are." He kissed her, slow and deep, and they made love with the tenderness of long familiarity. Afterward, Beatrice lay awake for a while, listening to Lucas's steady breathing and thinking about the strange journey that had brought her to this place. She thought about the question Lucas had asked her 13 years ago, when they barely knew each other. Can you love someone broken? At the time, she hadn't known the answer. She had been too broken herself, too focused on just surviving to think about love. But now she knew. Not only could you love someone broken, sometimes that was the deepest, truest kind of love there was. Because it was based on real understanding, real acceptance. It didn't require perfection or pretense. It just required honesty and commitment and the willingness to keep showing up, even on the hard days. She and Lucas had built something remarkable from the rubble of their losses. They had created a family, a home, a life full of meaning and purpose. They had learned to laugh again, to dream again, to hope for the future while honoring the past. They had discovered that healing was possible even when it seemed impossible, as long as you had someone to heal alongside. The next morning brought rain, unusual for Arizona but welcome after the dry heat. The children were excited, running outside to dance in the drops. Beatrice watched them from the porch, wrapped in a shawl, Lucas's arm around her shoulders. "Look at them," Lucas said softly. "So happy, so free. They don't carry the weight we carried at their age." "That's what we wanted," Beatrice reminded him. "To give them a childhood full of love and security. To break the cycle of loss and pain. We did it, didn't we? We actually did it." "We did," Beatrice agreed. They stood together, watching their children play, feeling the cool rain on their faces. The ranch spread out around them, beautiful in its ruggedness. The horses grazed peacefully in the pasture. Inside the house, the quilt Sarah had made covered their daughter's bed. In town, their son was teaching a new generation of children to read and write. Under their feet, the Arizona soil held the graves of Sarah and the first Emma, their memory preserved and honored. This was what healing looked like, Beatrice realized. Not forgetting, never forgetting. But moving forward anyway. Building new joy alongside old sorrow. Choosing life even when death had touched you deeply. She turned to Lucas and smiled, seeing him not as the broken man who had asked if they could heal together, but as the strong, loving husband and father he had become. He smiled back, and she knew he was seeing the same transformation in her. "I love you," she said. "I love you too," he replied. Then, now, and always. Their children called for them to come dance in the rain. Laughing, Beatrice and Lucas ran down from the porch, joining their family in the celebration of simple joy. The rain fell on all of them, washing away dust and heat, bringing the promise of growth and renewal. And in that moment, surrounded by the people she loved most in the world, Beatrice understood that the question wasn't really whether you could love someone broken. The question was whether you were brave enough to try, brave enough to be vulnerable and honest and real. Whether you were willing to do the hard work of healing, knowing it would never be fully finished. She and Lucas had been brave enough. They had chosen each other when choosing seemed impossible. They had built a life from the ashes of their old ones. They had learned that being broken wasn't the end of the story, just a difficult chapter in a longer journey. And here, in the middle of the Arizona territory, on a rainy morning in 1895, with her husband's hand in hers and her children's laughter ringing in her ears, Beatrice knew that the journey had been worth every painful step. They had healed together, just as they had promised. And they would keep healing, keep growing, keep loving each other through whatever came next. Because that was what love meant when you truly understood it. Not perfection, but persistence. Not the absence of pain, but the courage to face it together. Not being unbroken, but being brave enough to let someone see your broken pieces and choosing to help them gather theirs in return. That was the answer to Lucas's question. That was what they had discovered in 13 years of marriage. In the midst of raising children and running a ranch and learning to live with loss, you could love someone broken. And in loving them, in being loved by them despite your own brokenness, you could find a kind of wholeness that was more real and lasting than the untested innocence you had before. The rain continued to fall, gentle and steady, bringing life to the desert. And Beatrice danced in it with her family, grateful beyond words for the second chance she had been given, for the man who had seen her brokenness and offered his own in return, for the life they had built together from fragments and faith and stubborn, beautiful hope. This was her happy ending. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and true and earned through every tear and every triumph. This was what came after asking the hardest questions and being brave enough to try answering them with your life instead of just your words. Can you love someone broken? Yes. Oh yes, you absolutely can. And sometimes, in the loving and the being loved, you discover that broken is just another word for human, for real, for someone who has survived enough to understand what truly matters. Together, Beatrice and Lucas had found what mattered, and they had built a life around it that would stand as testimony to the power of healing, the strength of honest love, and the possibility of joy even in the aftermath of tremendous sorrow. As the rain slowed and the sun began to break through the clouds, casting rainbows across the wet desert landscape, Beatrice looked around at her family and felt complete. Not because she had forgotten her losses or erased her scars, but because she had learned to carry them alongside new blessings, new love, new life. This was healing. This was wholeness. This was home, and it was more than enough.